I think the biggest question, and it's the most general, and I promise we'll get a little bit more specific, but it is simply what are the criminal consequences that a business owner can face if they hire an undocumented worker?
Right. So there are both criminal and civil sanctions that may come your way if you hire somebody who's not authorized to be in the United States. The statute refers that the term used in the statute is unauthorized alien. And so anybody who is here in the United States without authorization to be here, if the employer hires them, that is a violation of the law. It also is a violation if you hire somebody without verifying whether they are authorized to work in the United States or not. Now, if you hire somebody and you they are unauthorized, but you did what you were supposed to do, you checked the documents and you didn't have any reason to know that they were unauthorized, that is an affirmative defense that may, that is a defense so that you may not get the civil and criminal sanctions. But if you don't do the checks, if you don't verify that they're authorized to work in the United States, then that's a problem. And if you do the checks, but you don't really do a good job, and you had reason to know that there was something fishy, but you just didn't really look into it, then you may be subject to both civil and criminal sanctions. The civil sanctions, I don't remember the exact dollar amount, but it's somewhere around like $1,000 or $2,000 for the first time that you do this. And as there are repeated offenses, then it goes up. So it's an escalating. And then if there is a pattern or practice of repeatedly doing the same thing, that can result in criminal consequences. I think it's up to 6 months in jail, in addition to other fines and things. So it is serious, and the federal government is taking it more seriously than in the past. So that's something employers need to be aware of.
You mentioned verification, and from what my layman's Googling has showed me is that that really involves an I-9 form. What else would be involved with verifying if an employee is documented versus undocumented? Like, what steps, if I'm an employer, do I need to take to safeguard myself?
Right. It's a great question. And what I would say is if you are at all in doubt, you should speak with an attorney. Don't get legal advice from what you see on the news with respect to your situation, because it is very situation dependent. That said, there are a number of different kinds of identification that somebody can provide. When you go get hired for a new job, they usually ask you for your passport or your birth certificate and your driver's license. So there's that whole list that you can look at, and you can provide those those forms of identification. And then employers should use the e-verify system as well to make sure that these are not forged documents or whatever. And if they do that and they use e-verify and it checks out, then you've done your job.
We have been here in the newsroom talking a lot about there are many ways that somebody could not necessarily be an American citizen, but they are in fact authorized to work in the country.
That's right.
So, in your experience, is it ever legal to hire an undocumented immigrant?
No, short answer is no. That's just it's prohibited to hire somebody who is not documented to work in the United States. That's if you are what the law refers to as an unauthorized alien, then it is illegal for an employer to employ you in the United States.
Uh, would you be able to talk a little bit about some of the outlets that somebody could not be a US citizen, but still legally entitled to work in the United States? Like, I know there's work permits and there's like work
Uh-huh.
visas and things. Can you just
Right.
talk a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is a somewhat labyrinthine system. There's a lot of a lot of ins and outs to it, and you're not going to get a good answer in just a few seconds here. But just a couple of them are: if somebody is a lawful permanent resident, they are authorized to work in the United States despite not being a United States citizen. So that's commonly referred to as a green card. Somebody is here, a lawful permanent resident, they can work in the United States. There are work visas. There are certain professions where they're struggling to find people to fill jobs. The federal government will issue a permit, and then you can sponsor a visa to bring somebody over from another country that is qualified to do these types of jobs, and they can do that. There are farm labor programs where people can hire foreign workers to come in on a farm labor work authorization, and that is something that's pretty common in a lot of the rural areas in New York. You'll see that not infrequently. So yeah, it's you don't necessarily have to be a citizen to be allowed to work, but you do have to have proper authorization to be able to work.
Does that play, and this is something now I'm starting to get out far in left field here, but does that play in if hypothetically I'm not a US citizen, but I am going through the process of, either applying for amnesty or I'm applying to be a citizen, can I legally work then? Or since I'm technically like I haven't reached the finish line with that procedure, I'm still not authorized to work? How does that kind of play?
Well, that's going to be very individual, and it's going to depend on the individual circumstances, whether you might have some kind of temporary permission. And the other thing is sometimes, although it may be illegal, they may be willing to exercise some sort of clemency to try to get this person if they're just trying to get their paperwork arranged or whatever. But that said, as an employer, you can't count on that, and so it's generally speaking, if well, I'll just put it this way: as an employer, you need to verify that somebody is authorized to work in the United States. If you can't do that, then you're it's going to be very risky to employ that person. And if you've got questions about a specific person that you're trying to hire, speak with an immigration attorney, see if they figure out there is some way that this person can get authorization. But don't just go hiring somebody because you think, well, they're in the process. You're setting yourself up for a lot of risk.
Mm. And speaking of risk, one thing that, well, a lot of things we've talked about in the newsroom. I don't want to get too specific with this business out in Cato, but this is one of the reasons that we're, reaching out to you, because we just have a lot of questions when it came to the raid in Cato and employment. So, could an employer, if I hypothetically were to hire dozens of undocumented workers, say, are there additional charges that could play along with that, like trafficking charges or something along the lines of exploitation or something along those lines?
It is possible. I'm not a criminal lawyer. I can't, give you all the ins and outs about the criminal charges that may be associated with human trafficking and things like that, smuggling. But yeah, this is not the only thing that could happen. There could be additional criminal issues that you could look at. Now, another thing that I think is probably important for a lot of your listeners or viewers to understand is that because it's illegal to hire an undocumented worker in the United States, that doesn't mean that if you do hire them, that you don't have to pay them. There have been multiple court decisions where courts have said, look, if you came into this country, you allowed someone to work, sorry, not you came in, but you hired somebody who came into this country, you allowed them to work for you, they did work for you, you have to pay them. It is the law. It is illegal to hire anybody and not pay them minimum wages or overtime, as the case may be. So, just because if you are an unscrupulous employer and you've hired undocumented workers and you think, well, I can stiff them at the end of their time and not have to pay them, in addition to the risk that you may face for violating the law against hiring undocumented workers, you also have some risk that they may be able to sue you for the wages that you didn't pay them. Or even if they don't, the Department of Labor may come after you and say, look, you employed people in our state without paying them. That's illegal. The federal or the state Department of Labor. So that's another consequence that may come about that people may not always be aware of.
That actually was going to be one of my next questions because during the press conference, the uh, state attorney did mention that uh, the IRS might be investigating this particular company, which got us all thinking about what you just talked about and the fact that,
Mhm.
even if they are an undocumented worker, morals, ethics do play a little part in it where you're like, hey, I'm hiring this person. I want to give them their 40 hours a week. I'm going to give them health care. I'm going to give them minimum wage. I'm going to give
Right.
them overtime, a retirement type thing. So
Yeah.
even I kind of want to get into that a little bit because even if they are undocumented and it was illegal for them to be hired in the first place, once they are hired, they could still face these consequences if they're not following, I guess, financial law in that regard,
Yeah.
right? And I mean,
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that because I
Sure.
think it's really important that a lot of people are saying, oh, they're taking jobs away from American workers, and then the company is being unscrupulous by not paying them properly. So they're like double dipping, and
Right.
fully see the illegality of that. And I'm not sure our viewers or listeners are even aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the way it works, so there's I guess two sets of laws, probably multiple kinds of laws that apply, but there's the what we would call employment laws, laws that govern wages, hours, benefits, that sort of thing. And then there's also tax laws that may apply. You have to pay certain payroll taxes and things like that. Now, the employment laws governing wages, hours, benefits, those laws don't make exceptions for undocumented workers. They say if you employ somebody, these are the rules you have to follow. And you know, there have been cases where people have come forward well, first of all, there have been cases where people have been afraid to come forward because they're undocumented and they're not being paid, they're being exploited as labor and whatever else, and they're afraid to come forward. And departments of labor, both state and federal, they have an interest in enforcing these laws, and so in order to avoid situations where people are afraid to come forward, they have taken the position that no, even if you're undocumented, you are still covered by these laws. The courts have also taken the position that people who are undocumented are still covered by these laws because the idea is if you have, as an employer, have violated the law by hiring an undocumented worker, you don't get to use your own violation of the law to excuse your other violations. That's the idea behind it. They say, look, if you know there is no exception for undocumented workers. If you hire people, this is what you have to do. Now, the IRS, again, I am not a tax attorney, so I can't give you all the ins and outs of tax law, but generally speaking, the IRS, they don't particularly care whether your people that you hired were undocumented or not. They're going to look at, okay, did you hire people and did you pay your payroll taxes? So, you need to be aware of that. And if you as an employer have any doubt, speak with a tax attorney, speak with an employment lawyer, speak with an immigration attorney. Make sure that you're square with the law because there is a lot of risk.
Jared, I think I don't really have like one more here. You've been answering. I had a whole list, and you just keep answering everything. So we understand that the administration right now is cracking down on this. There are a lot of larger enforcement efforts going on right now.
Yeah.
So if hypothetically I'm an employer and I suspect that I might have undocumented workers within my ranks, what do I do?
I would say speak with an attorney. That's number one. You want to make sure that you don't want to I'll put it this way. There's a lot of risk on both sides of this equation, right? If I'm going to, as an employer, assume that somebody is undocumented because of the fact they speak with an accent or something, if I don't actually have a real basis to suspect them of being undocumented as opposed to just being foreign, and I start treating them differently from my other workers, I can face a lawsuit or enforcement action on the basis of unlawful discrimination, because it is illegal to discriminate against people on the basis of their national origin, ethnicity, things like that. But if you think that you really do have reason to believe that somebody may be undocumented, you should speak with an employment attorney and say, "Hey, listen, this is what I'm dealing with. What do you recommend? What can I do to verify whether I am violating the law or not?" But speaking with an attorney first is probably a good idea, because again, there's risk on both sides of this question, and you don't want to end up getting yourself behind a discrimination issue because you were overzealous in suspecting somebody of maybe being undocumented.
So many good points, Jared. Is there anything else that you would want to add just to the discussion about undocumented workers and employment?
Well, I guess what I'd say is that, well, this isn't so much a legal observation, but more of a practical observation. People hire undocumented workers because there is a demand for labor that is often not met. And as long as that demand is unmet, we're going to continue to see these problems. We can make laws, and those laws can be enforced, and employers need to be aware of the potential penalties. But unfortunately, no matter how many laws we make, as long as there is a demand, we're going to continue to see these issues.